Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of powdered wigs, candlelit excess, and enough perfume to asphyxiate a horse. That's right, we're heading to Versailles. Not just any Versailles, but Christmas at Versailles, where the French elite managed to turn celebrating the birth of Christ into a multi-day, gold-dipped endurance test of gossip, gluttony, and frostbite disguised as fashion. Before you sink into your gilded imagination, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. No royal decree required. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, put on a fan for that gentle palace breeze, and get comfortable. Maybe even pull your blanket up like it's a velvet cloak. Because tonight, you'll find out what it's like to live as a pampered aristocrat in a palace where the plumbing didn't work, the food was cold, and the politics were hotter than the fireplaces weren't. Let's pause for a moment. Ever wonder what Christmas dinner looked like when your forks were made of silver and your debt was made of despair? How much powdered sugar is too much for a wig? What do you gift a king who already owns France? And how does one flirt through a corset without passing out? Well, congratulations, you've just woken up at Versailles, December 25th, 1683. The air smells faintly of roasted swan and candle smoke. You're wearing 17 layers of brocade. And you're about to find out that Christmas in the most magnificent palace on earth was equal parts miracle, migraine, and mild food poisoning. It's Christmas morning at Versailles, which means waking not to carols, but to servants lighting 200 candles so your face looks holy before breakfast. The halls hum with whispers about who got invited to the king's private mass and who didn't. You stretch, yawn, and wonder if God can hear prayers muffled by lace. You open your eyes to a ceiling fresco so detailed it almost looks back at you. Angels hover above in soft pastels, eternally delighted, probably because they don't have to deal with 17 layers of clothing and a powdered wig that doubles as a small ecosystem. A footman tiptoes in with the grace of someone who knows that startling a half-awake duke could result in unemployment or execution, or both. He gently opens your curtains, and the weak winter light drifts in like a sigh. Outside, the gardens are silver with frost, statues glistening like they, too, have been caught pretending to pray. You sit up, immediately regretting it. The room is freezing. The marble floor could double as a glacier, and your breath fogs the air like you've just wandered into a decorative meat locker. You briefly consider crawling back under your embroidered coverlet, but dignity and the faint smell of chocolate from downstairs pull you onward. A maid approaches with your morning toilette, a basin of lukewarm water and a towel that feels suspiciously like parchment. You dab at your face, trying not to chip your composure. Bathing, of course, is out of the question. It's winter, and cleanliness is still considered a hobby for the overly ambitious. As you sit before your mirror, another servant dusts your hair with enough powder to classify the air as a respiratory hazard. Très magnifique, she whispers. Even though you look like an elegant ghost who hasn't slept in centuries, you nod solemnly, pretending this ritual of mild suffocation brings spiritual clarity. Because at Versailles, holiness is 80% optics and 20% perfume. Down the hall, bells ring for the king's rising. The sound ripples through the corridors like a divine alarm clock, and every noble in the building jolts upright. You can hear the scramble of shoes, the creak of corsets, the low murmur of desperate flattery rehearsed under breath. It's not enough to be awake. You must appear gratefully awakened by the glory of monarchy itself. It's a competitive sport, and the winner gets eye contact from the king, maybe. You walk through the corridor, careful to glide, not stomp. The marble is slick, the air smells of beeswax and envy, and every glance feels like an evaluation. Christmas at Versailles isn't about joy. It's about hierarchy wrapped in tinsel. Somewhere, a violin plays softly, a festive soundtrack for mutual suspicion. Servants bustle around carrying trays of gilded cups and tiny pastries shaped like theological metaphors. You pass a countess who's already crying, loudly claiming she was moved by the holiness of the morning. In truth, she's mourning the fact that her seat at Mass has been moved 2 rows back, spiritual demotion via upholstery. You offer her a sympathetic nod, though secretly you're thrilled. That means your seat is closer to the king's line of sight, closer to the candlelight, and maybe to salvation. Finally, the doors to the chapel open. Gold leaf glitters on every surface. Cherubs stare down with the blank indifference of overworked interns. The air is thick with incense and cold breath. You kneel gracefully, trying not to pass out from the mixture of perfume and fasting. As the choir begins, you reflect on the strange irony of it all, that while peasants pray for warmth, you're praying not to sneeze into a bishop's wig. When the king finally enters, the room transforms. Every head bows. The king doesn't walk so much as he processes, wrapped in sunlight and authority. You can't help but feel a shiver of awe, not divine, but political. His power radiates like the gilded sun motifs etched into every wall. For one dizzy moment, you think, perhaps this is what heaven looks like: expensive, exhausting, and slightly flammable. The service drags on. You mouth hymns, count chandeliers, and try not to let your knees go numb. Finally, as the final amen echoes through the chapel, the courtiers rise, like a field of polished tulips. You breathe out, dizzy from incense and ambition, and realize you've survived another Christmas morning at Versailles, the holiest place on earth where faith, fashion, and fear of irrelevance all kneel together. And as you leave the chapel, brushing powdered snow from your sleeves, you catch your reflection in a mirror, tired, immaculate, absurdly luminous. For a brief, guilty second, you think of the peasants trudging through the mud outside the palace walls. Then you adjust your lace collar and keep walking. After all, guilt at Versailles is just another accessory, worn gracefully with gold. Before you can face Christmas Mass, you must wrestle your body into something that screams, "I love Jesus," but also attention. Silk stockings, embroidered vests, wigs taller than your ego. It's less getting dressed and more assembling a French pastry that can walk. Your morning begins not with prayer, but with the silent entrance of at least 5 servants whose only goal is to transform your fragile, shivering form into an icon of divine excess. They move around you like a pit crew for vanity. One hands you silk undergarments, another unrolls your stockings with the reverence of a man handling holy relics, and a third stands ready with the ceremonial shoehorn. You're not being dressed, you're being assembled. Every layer has a purpose, and none of them involve comfort or logic. The first layer is linen, soft but shockingly cold, clinging to you like a desperate ghost. Over that goes the shirt, the waistcoat, and the corset. Yes, the corset. Because 17th century fashion did not discriminate when it came to suffering. You inhale, your servant pulls the laces tight, and suddenly your ribs are a diplomatic incident. Breathing becomes more of an optional pastime, like reading poetry or paying taxes. Next come the breeches, which are essentially silk shorts that end mid-thigh, perfect for showing off legs that have never seen sunlight or real work. They're held in place with tiny gold buttons designed to test your patience and your circulation. Your stockings must be rolled just right, high enough to show off your calves, but not so high that you look like you're auditioning for Divine Comedy. Now comes the main event, the coat. It's less of a garment and more of a personal crisis covered in embroidery. Every inch is stitched with silver thread, tiny jewels, and possibly the tears of the tailor who made it. You try to lift your arm and immediately regret it. The fabric rustles ominously, like a bag of coins arguing with itself. You look magnificent, but you also move like someone who's just been cursed by an expensive chandelier. A servant holds up a mirror. You're not done yet. The wig awaits, a mountainous confection of curls powdered until it looks like it's been left out in a snowstorm. It's so tall that it threatens local airspace. Another servant begins the delicate process of pinning and adjusting, while you sit there wondering how much existential dread weighs. The answer, apparently, is about 5 pounds of horsehair and starch. Perfume is next, because nothing says Christmas purity like marinating yourself in floral alcohol. The room fills with notes of rose, amber, and mild suffocation. It's so potent that the wallpaper briefly loses consciousness. You cough delicately into a lace handkerchief, not because you need to, but because it's fashionable to suffer gracefully. Jewelry follows. Rings, brooches, ribbons, and that one decorative sword you'll never use but absolutely must carry because it says I could duel someone if I weren't so tired. You shine, glitter, and jingle faintly when you move, like a sentient ornament. Somewhere deep down, you know that the peasants outside the palace could probably see their own reflection in your cuffs. And yet, through the layers of silk and the fog of perfume, there's a strange satisfaction. You feel less like a person and more like an aesthetic achievement. A living symbol of France's greatest export. Elegance taken to the brink of absurdity. You stand tall, careful not to faint, and try to ignore the quiet creak of fabric plotting against you. As you prepare to leave for Christmas Mass, your valet whispers, "Magnifique." You nod, trying not to tilt your head too fast. One wrong move and your wig could collapse like an overbaked soufflé. You walk toward the door, every step a symphony of squeaking shoes and swishing satin. For one glorious moment, as you glide past the gilded mirrors, you almost believe it was worth it. The corset, the powder, the small loss of circulation. You look divine, you feel important, you smell like a flower shop during a fire sale. And though you can't bend, breathe, or sit without assistance, you're ready to face Christmas in Versailles. Because here, holiness and fashion are one and the same. The closer you look to collapsing from elegance, the closer you are to God. You sit patiently as your valet pounds your head with a mountain of scented powder. It's snowing indoors. Your lungs are full of lavender dust, and your sinuses are screaming. By the end, you look both divine and slightly ghostly. The ideal 17th century aesthetic. The wig ritual is less about style and more about survival. At Versailles, hair is war. Everyone's competing for vertical dominance, trying to reach God by way of powdered scaffolding. Your valet approaches with a brush, a puff, and the solemn focus of a surgeon operating on vanity itself. He starts dusting your curls with enough starch to bake a cake. The powder hangs thick in the air, coating your eyelashes, your shoulders, the furniture, possibly even your soul. You sneeze delicately, which is the polite way of saying you temporarily lose 30% of your respiratory function. The smell is overwhelming, lavender mixed with orris root, bergamot, and what can only be described as expensive regret. Every nobleman in the building smells the same. Floral, faintly alcoholic, and one bad spark away from becoming a scented fireball. Fireplaces are burning. Candles flicker in every corner. And you are, technically speaking, a walking pile of kindling in a powdery disguise. Your wig, of course, isn't really yours. It once belonged to a horse, or a goat, or possibly a very confused peasant. The base is stiff with pomade, a delightful blend of animal fat and mystery wax that traps every particle of dust and dignity within a 2-foot radius. Over time, this mixture hardens into a sort of historical helmet, protecting your head from weather, humility, and oxygen. Every so often, your valet pauses to inspect his handiwork, stepping back with narrowed eyes as though he's painting the Sistine Chapel. Except the canvas is your scalp. He gestures to add more curls, more volume, more majesty. You nod, mostly because your neck can no longer turn. Somewhere in the distance, another noble sneezes violently, and the room briefly resembles a pastel dust storm. You remember, dimly, why this tradition began. Wigs were supposed to cover thinning hair, which itself was often a side effect of untreated diseases that polite society refused to name out loud. But over time, necessity turned into fashion, and fashion turned into mania. Now, to appear at Versailles without a wig is to announce to the world that you've given up on life, love, and upward mobility. The bigger the wig, the higher your status, and possibly your risk of spinal injury. You've heard horror stories. Courtiers collapsing mid-conversation because their wigs were too heavy. Ladies accidentally setting their coiffures alight during dinner. Mice nesting in the curls of wigs stored overnight. These are not rumors. These are lifestyle hazards. And yet, here you are, enduring this chemical snowstorm with the calm resignation of someone who knows that looking ridiculous is mandatory if you wish to remain visible. The powdering continues. Your valet pats, brushes, and puffs until the world fades into a haze of pale mist. You start to lose track of where your hair ends and the air begins. Your reflection in the mirror is uncanny, pale as marble, eyes gleaming faintly beneath the fog. You look both immortal and moments away from fainting. Finally, the valet steps back and bows. "Perfect," he says, voice muffled through the haze. You nod, exhaling a puff of powder that settles like divine glitter around you. You've achieved the look. A ghost of wealth, a saint of vanity, an icon of controlled respiratory distress. You stand, slowly, careful not to disturb the masterpiece perched on your head. Every movement sends a soft cloud drifting behind you, the Versailles version of an aura. You glance toward the window. Outside, real snow falls over the frozen gardens. But inside, your own artificial blizzard rages on. You can't tell the difference anymore, and that's the point. Because at Versailles, beauty isn't natural. It's powdered, perfumed, and painstakingly built from the bones of absurdity. You might cough, you might sneeze, you might slowly turn into a candle hazard, but for now, you are flawless. And if you must choke on elegance to achieve it, well, at least you'll look magnificent doing it. Louis XIV's morning routine makes modern influencers look lazy. You join the courtiers crowding his bedchamber, pretending it's a holy experience to watch him get dressed. Merry Christmas. You've become background furniture in a live, kingly unboxing video. The room is dim at first, filled with the gentle shuffle of slippers and the whisper of silk as attendants glide across polished floors. The King of France is still in bed, but the choreography has already begun. This isn't just waking up. It's a ritual, equal parts theatre, religion, and performance art. Every action, every yawn, every stretch is being witnessed by an audience of anxious nobles who would kill for the privilege of handing him a sock. You shuffle forward cautiously, careful not to stand too close to anyone more important than you, which is everyone. The courtiers line up in perfect hierarchy, waiting for the lever du roi, the king's rising. An event so formalized it might as well have come with a script. The Grand Chamberlain enters first, followed by the physicians, the priest, and then the lucky few chosen to assist in dressing His Majesty. They all bow deeply, as if gravity itself just increased near the royal bed. The curtains are drawn back. Sunlight spills over gilded walls, making the gold leaf shimmer like divinity itself. There he is, Louis XIV, the Sun King, the man who turned waking up into a spectator sport. His hair is immaculate, his nightshirt embroidered with the royal crest, his expression one of divine inconvenience. The room collectively exhales. Somewhere, a woman faints quietly into a lace fan. The king stretches his arms, signaling that the dressing may commence. It's not simple. It's a 45-minute process requiring about a dozen people and a small amount of diplomacy. The Grand Chamberlain presents each article of clothing as if unveiling holy relics. The shirt, the stockings, the breeches, the vest. Every layer is blessed, kissed, and sometimes argued over. Who gets to hand the king his shoes? Who gets the honor of buckling his garter? These are not minor questions. They can make or break a courtier's entire career. You stand at the back, watching as one man holds the royal sleeve open while another slides it onto the king's arm, both pretending this is more spiritually fulfilling than sleep. No one dares speak unless spoken to. The silence hums with anticipation and the occasional discreet cough of someone inhaling too much wig powder. Then comes the mirror moment. Louis stands, admiring himself as if confirming that God made a wise decision putting him in charge. He nods slightly, approval granted. A ripple of relief sweeps through the room. The courtiers beam like reflected sunlight. You nod too, trying to look both devout and fashionably composed, though your feet have gone numb. Breakfast follows, a small, delicate meal. Though small for the king means 6 courses and a prayer for restraint. You pretend not to notice as he dips bread into broth, while a dozen people pretend not to notice that they're starving. You think of your own breakfast. 2 sips of watered chocolate and a mild sense of existential dread, and decide not to compare. The king speaks briefly, his words instantly enshrined in importance. The gardens shall be opened after Mass. Courtiers nod vigorously, as if he just rewrote the laws of physics. Someone laughs too loudly, and is met with silence so cold it could frost the mirrors. You keep your head down, studying the marble floor, wondering if being this close to absolute power makes people brilliant or just deeply, permanently anxious. When it's over, the king rises and glides out of the room surrounded by his attendants. A moving sun surrounded by orbiting planets. The courtiers follow, peeling off in order of rank, until the chamber is once again just a room filled with echoes and the faint smell of incense and perfume. You exhale, realizing you've been holding your breath for most of the ceremony. You've just witnessed the most important 5 minutes of the day, not for the king but for everyone else who survives off his glance. In this palace, even the act of waking up is political. You leave quietly, heart still pounding, powdered wig slightly crooked, already rehearsing your bow for tomorrow's performance. Because at Versailles, worship isn't reserved for God. It's reserved for the man who replaced him with better lighting. While peasants gnaw on turnips, your breakfast tray features hot chocolate thick enough to pave a road. You sip delicately, pretending not to notice your rival across the table counting your pastries like a tax auditor with trust issues. The morning air inside Versailles is cold, but the table glows like heaven's buffet. Golden trays gleam beneath candlelight, and each dish looks like it was assembled by angels with a flair for presentation and gout. Your servants hover behind you in perfect silence, their faces trained to betray nothing, not boredom, not judgment, not the knowledge that they haven't eaten since yesterday's leftover crusts. The smell of sugar, butter, and ambition fills the room. Breakfast, at Versailles, isn't a meal. It's a declaration of power disguised as a dietary choice. You could be starving and still expected to make it look like indulgence is your birthright. The court's obsession with ritual spills even into food. No one actually eats to live here. They dine to impress, gossip, and occasionally to plot someone's social ruin over a bowl of jam. You pick up your spoon like a duelist unsheathing a blade. The chocolate, imported from the New World and thickened with cream and crushed sugar, gleams in your porcelain cup. It's less a drink and more a liquid dessert that could probably double as floor sealant. You take a slow sip, letting it coat your tongue. Sweet, heavy, expensive, just the way sin tastes before noon. Across from you sits the Marquise de something or other, whose face is an architectural triumph of powder and denial. She's been staring at your plate since you sat down, clearly tallying the pastries before deciding whether to one-up you or feign disinterest. She waves for another croissant, the third, claiming it's for the little dog. The little dog is currently asleep on her lap, dreaming of a better life, somewhere with fewer wigs. You glance down the table. There's a cascade of platters, glazed fruits, honeyed almonds, candied violets, brioche, sausages wrapped in gold foil for reasons that defy logic, and cheeses soft enough to double as emotional support. Most of it will go untouched, destined to be cleared away so the next course can parade in like a royal army of indigestion. But no one stops the excess. Moderation is a language no one at Versailles ever learned. Every sound, the clink of a spoon, the crinkle of silk sleeves, the occasional fake laugh, echoes through the hall like part of a sacred symphony. Everyone is pretending to be serene while secretly assessing one another's choices. The Duke beside you dips bread into his chocolate with reckless abandon, and a ripple of scandalized whispers sweeps down the table. Dipping is vulgar, apparently. But he's old, and old nobles can afford to break etiquette the way they break hips. You try to relax, but breakfast is not relaxation. It's battle. Every bite you take is political. Eat too little, and you look ungrateful. Eat too much, and you look greedy. Show enthusiasm for the wrong dish. And suddenly, the kitchen gossip reaches the Queen by lunch. The safest option is polite starvation. A servant refills your chocolate, bowing so low you fear he might pass out from blood loss. The steam curls up like incense. And for a moment, you think about the peasants outside, shivering in the frost, eating whatever survived last season's harvest. Then the Count across the table clears his throat and loudly declares that fasting builds character. Everyone nods solemnly and takes another sip of cream. The King's steward enters, announcing that His Majesty has already breakfasted privately. Translation: he's tired of people watching him chew. There's a collective murmur of reverence, as though this act of digestive privacy is a miracle. You lift your spoon again, silently blessing the irony. When the final tray is cleared, your stomach is half full, your dignity half intact, and your sinuses permanently lined with cocoa fumes. The servants whisk away the remnants of the feast, like undertakers at a crime scene. You stand, adjusting your coat, your rings gleaming in the winter light. At Versailles, breakfast isn't nourishment, it's theatre. You don't eat for hunger, you eat to prove you belong, and as you glide toward the chapel for Christmas Mass, you can almost hear the faint crunch of turnips outside the palace walls, a reminder that luxury and guilt, like chocolate and gossip, always come served together. Mass at Versailles isn't for worship, it's Fashion Week with incense. Every duchess struts past the altar like a holy runway model, clutching a rosary and a grudge. You try to appear pious while mentally ranking everyone's lace collars. The chapel at Versailles is a glittering snow globe of piety and ego. The marble floors shine like mirrors. The chandeliers sparkle with enough candlelight to signal passing ships. And the scent of incense is battling valiantly against the collective force of 10 gallons of perfume. Choir boys sing in high, trembling voices, though most of the audience is too busy admiring their own reflections to notice. You file in, careful to bow, just enough to appear devout, but not so low that your wig shifts. The air hums with whispers, not prayers. Gossip. You catch fragments of conversation as nobles glide to their seats. Who was seen with whom? Whose fortune has collapsed? Whose dressmaker is secretly a miracle worker? And whose isn't? One duchess pretends to faint just to show off the embroidery on her underskirt. You sigh. It's going to be a long service. Your pew is painfully narrow, designed less for comfort and more for posture correction. You perch elegantly, back straight, hands folded, soul mildly suffocating. Across the aisle, the Duchess of Orleans adjusts her fan with military precision. An unspoken code for "I hate you" directed at half the congregation. To your left, a baroness whispers to her companion that fasting is a spiritual act. Despite the powdered sugar dusting her décolletage, betraying the remains of a pre-mass pastry, the priests enter in solemn procession, their robes trailing behind them like clouds of sanctified silk. The organ swells. For a moment, you almost feel moved, until the countess beside you sighs loudly and mutters, "That's my fabric pattern." The illusion of reverence collapses instantly. Louis XIV arrives last, of course, his presence igniting a ripple through the crowd like a divine wind. Everyone stands, turns, bows. It's less a congregation and more a synchronized dance of flattery. The king glides to his private balcony above the altar, bathed in sunlight as though heaven itself has personally sponsored this appearance. Below, the queen and the rest of the royal family take their places, their faces composed masks of practiced serenity. The priest begins his sermon, a long and winding ode to humility that no one here is taking personally. You nod at the appropriate moments, pretending deep reflection while actually counting the number of diamonds on the Marquise de la Rochefoucauld's bodice. 47, maybe 48. You lose track when she turns and the light catches her so aggressively that your retinas file a complaint. As the choir launches into the Gloria, the congregation rises again. Lace sleeves flutter like angel wings. Pearls glint. Even the candles seem to bow in admiration. You open your hymn book, pretending to follow along, though the only Latin phrase you've truly mastered is mea culpa, which feels fitting. The king's voice joins in from above, low and steady, reminding everyone that even prayer sounds better when sung by someone rich enough to own France. Halfway through the service, the real show begins, the slow-motion parade of latecomers. Each noblewoman enters dramatically, pausing just long enough to let the sunlight halo her powdered face. The crowd murmurs approval or judgment depending on hem length and fabric choice. You swear someone in the back just whispered, "That's so last reign." The sermon ends, and as communion begins, the room erupts into a polite chaos of movement. Those of higher rank glide forward first, followed by the rest of you, a hierarchy preserved even before God. You shuffle in line, clutching your rosary like a ticket to salvation, wondering if the priest notices that most of the congregation looks more like they're waiting for champagne than forgiveness. Finally, the final hymn fades. The crowd disperses into polite chatter and competitive smiles. You bow once more to the altar, murmuring a thank you, not to heaven, but to the corset that somehow didn't crack during kneeling. As you exit, you take one last look at the glittering chapel, the echo of gossip still hanging in the air. You realize the irony isn't lost on anyone here. At Versailles, salvation may be promised in the afterlife, but status is eternal, and in the chapel, as in the ballroom, the holiest thing you can possess is the ability to make everyone else wish they were you. The Hall of Mirrors gleams in the weak winter sun, and you pretend not to shiver. Versailles is beautiful, yes, but also colder than an ex's voicemail. You marvel at your reflection and wonder if vanity counts as a sin if gods clearly impressed. The corridor stretches endlessly before you, a shimmering monument to excess and poor insulation. 17 arched windows throw pale light onto 17 matching mirrors, reflecting your face back at you in infinite, slightly judgmental succession. It's like standing between two portals of narcissism, a reminder that at Versailles, reflection isn't just decorative, it's mandatory. You're surrounded by versions of yourself, each one slightly paler, slightly colder, and slightly more confused about why you thought this would be fun. Your shoes click on the marble floor, echoing like distant applause. The sound makes you feel important, even if your toes are starting to go numb. Every breath hangs in the air like a ghost, joining hundreds of others who froze here before you. The chandeliers sway slightly in the draft, their crystals catching what little sunlight manages to sneak in through the frost-fogged glass. It's all very grand and deeply impractical. You could fit an entire village in this hallway, but God forbid someone installs a fireplace. Servants hurry past, brushing at the mirrors with cloths, as though trying to polish the winter out of them. The air smells faintly of wax, perfume, and desperation. Versailles' signature scent. A lady in a gown the size of a small continent glides by, her heels tapping like warning bells. Her breath comes out in little puffs of steam, but she doesn't acknowledge it. Nobility does not get cold. They merely reflect the chill of the season. You, however, are freezing and silently debating whether hypothermia is a more dignified death than fainting into a curtain. Around you, courtiers stroll, pretending to admire the art, while actually scanning for witnesses to their own magnificence. The mirrors aren't here for decoration. They're surveillance, self-esteem amplifiers, and passive-aggressive status checkers all at once. You pass a pair of nobles locked in silent competition over who can bow more gracefully at their own reflection. It's a tie, mostly because neither of them can get back up without assistance. Somewhere near the end of the hall, musicians begin tuning their instruments for the evening's entertainment. The notes float down the corridor, crisp and trembling in the cold. It sounds like winter itself has decided to play a symphony, elegant, haunting, and slightly out of tune. You wrap your arms around yourself, careful not to crease the fabric of your embroidered coat, and pretend that goosebumps are fashionable. You stop in front of one particular mirror, the one rumored to reflect not just beauty, but ambition. For a fleeting moment, you catch your reflection looking back at you, smug and radiant, framed in gold. You wonder if this is how Louis XIV felt every day. Surrounded by luxury so vast, it became its own kind of prison. Every inch of the hall of mirrors screams power. But power, as you're starting to realize, is drafty. A courtier nearby murmurs about how the mirrors were once considered miracles of technology, imported from Venice at staggering cost. You nod as if impressed, though all you can think is that none of them are thick enough to block the wind currently attacking your legs. You glance up at the painted ceiling, where cherubs hover eternally above, naked and apparently immune to frostbite. You envy them. A servant offers to escort you out, but you shake your head. You linger for one last look, because it's hard to leave beauty like this, even when it hurts. The mirrors shimmer in the light, multiplying everything: the glory, the vanity, the cold. You catch your reflection one final time. Regal, trembling, magnificent, ridiculous. You turn away, your breath fogging the glass behind you. Somewhere deep inside, you understand what Versailles really is. Not a palace, but a perfect illusion. A place where people freeze smiling, convinced the glitter is warmth. And as you step out of the Hall of Mirrors, you carry that illusion with you, dazzling, fragile, and colder than ever. Every Christmas, Versailles turns into a social coliseum. Behind every fan flutter, someone's reputation dies. You nod, smile, and quietly realize that the only thing sharper than the chandeliers are the rumors about who's sleeping with the king's cousin's cousin. The great hall buzzes like a hive dipped in perfume and paranoia. Nobles glide past each other in clouds of silk and suspicion, their smiles painted on thicker than their rouge. You can feel the tension humming in the air, not because of politics or religion, but because someone wore last season's lace trim. The horror. Gossip at Versailles isn't entertainment. It's currency, strategy, and sometimes warfare. Every whisper is a weapon. Every compliment a carefully sharpened blade. You might think these people spend their days composing poetry or governing estates, but in truth, they're professional rumor architects, building scandals so elaborate they should come with floor plans. You hover near the corner of the ballroom, holding your glass of wine like a shield. A marquise drifts by, her fan flicking open and closed. The universal language of passive aggression. One flick, I saw the Duchess sneaking out after midnight. 2 flicks, her husband knows. A deliberate pause, and he's not happy. It's Morse code for chaos. You pretend to study the ceiling fresco, but are secretly absorbing every syllable. In Versailles, information is survival, and silence is suicide. The conversations are layered, pleasantries up front, daggers beneath. You look radiant tonight, says one countess to another. Translation: I know your wig's covering a bald spot, and you, so slim, comes the reply. Meaning, we all heard about your doctor's secret herbs. You sip your wine, hoping to remain invisible, but invisibility is its own kind of scandal. People notice if you don't gossip. That means you're hiding something. Probably a lover. Or worse, humility. Near the fireplace, a circle of aristocrats exchange tidbits about last night's dinner. Apparently, the Duke of something important complimented the Queen twice, once too often. The King was not amused, someone murmurs. Another voice adds, but Madame de Montespan certainly was. The group titters like a flock of jeweled birds. You can practically feel the reputations evaporating in real time. You wander further into the crowd, past a cluster of powdered men laughing too loudly, each trying to sound closer to power than the other. The King confides in me daily, boasts one. Really? Replies another. He only yawned in my direction yesterday. The laughter that follows is polite, but poisoned. You begin to understand that Versailles isn't a palace, it's a battlefield disguised as a ballroom. Even the servants get involved. You see, a footman leaned discreetly toward a maid, whispering something that makes her eyes widen. She disappears. And within minutes the rumor has spread 3 rooms away, evolving mid-flight. By dessert, someone will swear they saw the Archbishop in a compromising position with a goose. No one will question it. They'll just add embroidery. And then, of course, there are the royal mistresses. They're the celebrities of this gilded gossip mill, adored, envied, and dissected hourly. One misplaced sigh from the king and the entire court explodes in speculation. Has he grown bored? Is there a new favorite? Has someone younger, paler, or more flammable entered the scene? The stakes are biblical. One false whisper can ruin a life. One clever, one can buy a future. You find yourself caught in the current, smiling, nodding, and occasionally feigning shock at something you only half understand. You say little, but you listen to everything, because at Versailles, listening is an art form. Everyone's voice is honeyed, everyone's intention is arsenic. By the end of the morning, reputations have risen and fallen like stocks. Alliances have formed, collapsed, and quietly resurrected themselves over compliments about hat feathers. And yet, despite the carnage, everyone still bows, smiles, and pretends that Christmas is about goodwill. As you leave the room, You catch your reflection in a gilded mirror, your expression perfectly serene, your eyes betraying nothing. You've survived another round of the blood sport. Tomorrow, the gossip will move on to someone else. But for tonight, you're safe. At least until someone notices you were seen not speaking to the right people. In the grand game of Versailles, silence might be golden, but here, gold is just another way to draw blood. Gift-giving at Versailles isn't sentimental, it's survival. You hand the Queen a jewel-encrusted snuff box worth a year's rent, praying she remembers your name for at least 10 minutes. Forget Secret Santa. This is public bankruptcy. At Versailles, generosity is an Olympic event, and everyone's competing for the gold medal in financial ruin. The halls glitter with wrapped offerings, boxes tied with silk ribbons, tiny portraits framed in diamonds, and delicate trinkets so expensive they should come with their own security detail. There's no such thing as thoughtful here. A hand-knit scarf would earn you public humiliation and possibly exile. The only thought behind a gift is, will this keep me relevant until spring? The court's unspoken rule is simple. The higher the value, the higher the visibility. You don't give because you care. You give because you're terrified of being forgotten. The king might not remember your face, but he'll remember the emerald-encrusted clock you casually left in his study. The Queen might never speak to you again, but perhaps she'll nod politely next time you curtsy, which in Versailles terms is emotional intimacy. You've already spent the week consulting your valet, your banker, and possibly your ancestors on what to give this year. Last Christmas, you offered a pair of imported gloves stitched with gold thread, a tasteful, sensible choice. No one noticed. This year, you've gone all in. A miniature harp made of ivory and gilt, imported from Italy, engraved with a poem you didn't write. It costs roughly the same as feeding 50 families for a year. But then again, so does breakfast here. The presentation is half the point. You can't simply hand someone a gift. That's barbaric. You must perform it. Servants parade through the corridors, carrying each gift like a holy relic, while you trail behind pretending not to care. You catch the eye of a rival across the hall, her lips curling in that silent, sugar-coated duel that passes for politeness. Her gift? A sapphire necklace rumored to once belong to a duchess, or maybe her husband's mistress. At Versailles, provenance is always murky, and moral bankruptcy often outpaces the financial kind. The Queen receives her gifts in the grand salon, beneath a chandelier so heavy it could kill a man if it sneezed wrong. Courtiers line up like penitents at confession, clutching their extravagances and their debts. You step forward, heart pounding, offering your masterpiece. "Your Majesty," you murmur, bowing so low your wig threatens to defect. She smiles faintly, accepting your harp with the weary grace of someone who's been handed 12 identical miracles before lunch. You step aside, relieved, until you hear the soft ripple of laughter behind you. The Duke of Artois just presented a gilded carriage clock shaped like a cherub riding a dolphin. The room gasps. You feel your stomach drop. The Queen's eyes light up for the first time all morning. Congratulations. You've just been out-gifted by a man whose only talent is inherited wealth. The rest of the day dissolves into a haze of envy and calculation. Servants cart away the mountain of royal loot to the treasury, while courtiers whisper and tally up what everyone spent. You overhear a count boasting about his diamond-studded prayer book. For the Lord, naturally. Someone else claims their gift cost more than their chateau. No one doubts it. At Versailles, inflation isn't economic. It's spiritual. By evening, the gifts are forgotten, buried beneath fresh gossip and the faint scent of desperation. You wander back to your chambers, pockets lighter, conscience heavier. You try not to think about the peasants outside the gates. their only gift tonight being frostbite and faith. You pour yourself a glass of wine and stare at the window's reflection, powdered, pale, perfect. You smile grimly. Because here, generosity isn't measured by kindness or heart, but by how spectacularly you can go broke in public. Tomorrow, the Queen will forget your name again, but for one glittering moment, you were relevant, radiant, and totally, gloriously doomed. You finally sit at a table longer than a city block, surrounded by roasted peacocks, sugared fruits, and entire forests of candied almonds. Everyone's pretending to savor the food, but mostly you're all performing wealth-induced indigestion. The air hums with the sound of cutlery and shallow conversation, the polite clinking of people pretending to enjoy themselves while secretly wondering if it's too late to die dramatically and skip dessert. Every inch of the table groans under the weight of excess. Silver platters piled with glistening meats, crystal bowls overflowing with crimson jellies, pies so tall they qualify as architecture. The scent is intoxicating, butter, spice, and barely restrained sin. This isn't dinner. It's an edible sermon on opulence. Roasted swans glimmer beneath their own feathers, stitched back on for presentation. Whole boars grin from gilded platters, each one stuffed with smaller animals, as if Russian nesting dolls were edible. There's pheasant, venison, and goose, so shiny it reflects your guilt. And of course peacocks, flamboyant, unnecessary, and perfectly on theme for Versailles. You glance down the table. Dozens of courtiers sit shoulder to shoulder, each pretending to be enthralled by the conversation, while eyeing the king's every gesture. Louis XIV sits at the head, framed in candlelight, haloed by gold, looking for all the world like he's hosting Christmas dinner for heaven. Every time he lifts a fork, the entire room pauses, like a flock of jeweled birds awaiting divine permission to chew. Your plate is a masterpiece of portion control and fear. You've taken just enough to seem grateful, but not so much that you appear greedy. You're nibbling on something that might be duck or possibly dessert, and trying not to show how uncomfortable your corset has become. The man beside you, a viscount with a moral compass forged entirely out of silverware, leans over to whisper, "Don't eat the custard. Last year, it killed a bishop." You laugh politely, then pretend you weren't planning to anyway. Servants move through the room in a silent ballet, refilling glasses, replacing dishes, removing evidence. Their faces are blank masks of practiced invisibility. They glide between nobles as if gravity doesn't apply to them. You watch one carefully balancing a tray of golden goblets, moving with such precision that you half expect the crowd to applaud. They don't. No one ever does. The king raises his glass, and instantly the music swells. A toast. Everyone rises, shimmering like a field of polished armor. You echo his words. Something about peace, prosperity, and France's continued glory, while privately noting that half the table hasn't stopped waging social war since soup was served. The glasses clink, the hall vibrates. Someone sneezes into a lace handkerchief worth more than your house. Courses arrive and vanish like dreams. There are sweetmeats carved into mythical creatures, marzipan castles complete with sugar drawbridges, and pies filled with songbirds that are, incredibly, still alive when sliced open. They flutter upward in a glorious, horrifying explosion of feathers and panic. You clap politely, unsure whether to admire the craftsmanship or question your sanity. You lean back, pretending contentment, though your stomach is writing an angry letter to your brain. Across the table, the Duchess of Something Long and Complicated fans herself, whispering that she's absolutely faint with delight. Translation: She can't breathe through her corset and is praying for divine intervention. As the final course arrives, a pudding engulfed in brandy flames, the room fills with applause. The chandeliers sparkle like frozen fireworks. For a brief, glittering moment, Versailles looks exactly as it wants to be remembered. Radiant, flawless, eternal. You almost believe it. Then someone at the far end coughs, loudly, breaking the spell. A servant rushes to clear a plate. A lady laughs too hard, and the illusion fractures just a little. You realize that beneath the laughter and lace, everyone is exhausted, stuffed with sugar, secrets, and fear of falling out of favor. You take one last bite, a spoonful of something sweet and undefinable, and smile. Because here at Versailles, even indigestion is an act of grace. The feast will end, the candles will burn low, and tomorrow you'll do it all again. After all, gluttony at Versailles isn't a sin. It's tradition. No one leaves the table until the king does. So you nibble politely while your stomach considers open rebellion. You can't slouch, you can't burp, and you definitely can't admit that everything tastes faintly of candle wax and regret. You shift slightly in your chair, which groans under the collective weight of your brocade outfit, powdered wig, and the crushing pressure of social expectation. The air is thick with the smell of roast meats, perfumes, and whatever unholy combination of butter and ambition is currently steaming off the table. The king has taken another bite, which means you must remain poised and alive until he decides digestion is fashionable. Across the table, a duke is attempting to carve his pheasant without breaking eye contact with the royal dais. It's a delicate art, eating without appearing to eat. You can't look too eager, that's peasant behavior. But refusing food entirely is suspicious. At Versailles, appetite is moral performance. Every forkful must communicate restraint, grace, and the illusion that your body is powered entirely by flattery. The conversation hums around you like the world's most passive-aggressive orchestra. Courtiers murmur compliments with the precision of assassins. "Your gown is divine," says one duchess to another, her tone dripping with enough venom to curdle the cream sauce. "And yours," the other replies sweetly. "So daring. I could never pull off that shade of mustard." You cut into your meat quietly, wishing your knife were sharper and your hearing duller. You sneak a glance at the king. He's eating slowly, methodically, as though each mouthful is a royal decree. Every time his fork pauses mid-air, the room collectively stops breathing. You've seen men faint in these pauses, their blood sugar dropping faster than their social standing. Someone always rushes to revive them, not out of compassion, but because no one wants to clean up the mess. A servant glides by, refilling your wine with practiced invisibility. You take a cautious sip. It's strong, fruity, and just slightly sour, like the mood of every underfed courtier here. You catch your reflection in the goblet's surface, powdered, flawless, and absolutely terrified. The wine steadies you. Briefly, then someone laughs, too loudly down the table. A mistake. Heads turn. The king glances up, and the laughter dies, mid-giggle, executed on the spot. Time stretches. Your stomach is staging a small revolution, but decorum forbids even the faintest sigh. The food is rich, too rich. Butter and cream and sauces so heavy they could drown a village. You pretend to savor it, nodding appreciatively, but your taste buds have surrendered to fatigue. Every dish blurs together into one unified flavor. Excess. Someone whispers that the king might be nearly finished. Hope flickers like candlelight. You straighten your back, bracing for freedom. Then, betrayal. The king gestures for another plate. Another plate. The collective morale of the table collapses silently. You glance at your neighbor, who looks moments away from tears or cardiac arrest. There is no empathy between you, only mutual despair. By now, the musicians have begun their quiet accompaniment. Violins and flutes weaving soft melodies that mock your suffering. You dab your lips with your napkin, not because they need it, but because it's one of the few movements allowed. You've been sitting for so long that your legs have gone numb and your spine feels like it's been replaced by marble. Finally, the king stands. The signal. Chairs scrape back like thunder. Every noble in the room rises in perfect, trembling unison. You bow, your corset digging into your ribs one last time as you exhale pure relief. The meal is over. Survival achieved. As the king leaves, the courtiers erupt into polite applause, as though he's just performed a miracle rather than digestion. Servants descend upon the table to clear the battlefield. Plates stripped, crumbs whisked away, evidence erased. You stagger toward the exit, dizzy, overfed, and undersold. Outside the hall, the cold air hits your face, sharp and clean. You inhale deeply, feeling human again. For a brief moment, you almost laugh, because here, in the Palace of Abundance, eating isn't pleasure, it's endurance. You've just survived the world's most elegant hostage situation. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again, smiling through the candle wax and regret. Every glass sparkles, not with bubbles, but with mystery. Because at Versailles, wine isn't for thirst, it's for gossip lubrication. By the third toast, you're complimenting people you secretly hate and promising favors you'll never remember. The first sip arrives before the first course even cools. You raise your crystal goblet, so thin it might disintegrate under the weight of your own insincerity, and pretend to appreciate the vintage. The truth is, you have no idea where this wine came from, Burgundy, Bordeaux, or possibly just a very ambitious puddle outside Paris. What matters is that it's red, strong, and socially mandatory. Refusing a glass is more scandalous than fainting in church. Servants glide between tables, refilling glasses like clockwork. It's a delicate rhythm, pour, nod, retreat, and no one ever lets a cup stay empty. The wine here is endless, a glittering tide that keeps tongues loose and reputations looser. It's the lifeblood of Versailles, the secret ingredient in every compliment, quarrel, and poorly thought-out flirtation. You sip again. It's rich, earthy, and faintly metallic, possibly from the goblet, possibly from your rising anxiety. Around you, conversation bubbles like a cauldron. The Duke of something self-important is loudly insisting that his vineyard produces wine superior to the king's cellar. The king's steward is already smiling in that way that means, "We'll see how your grapes taste in the Bastille." By the second glass, decorum softens. People laugh louder. Compliments grow suspiciously generous. Someone you haven't spoken to in months suddenly loves your outfit, your wit, and maybe your estate if you happen to die soon. The Queen smiles at the Archbishop smiles back. And for a brief, intoxicating moment, everyone forgets they hate each other. By the third glass, the music starts to sound better. You lean forward to share a joke with a countess whose name you've forgotten, and she laughs so hard that her wig tilts precariously to one side. It's fine. Everyone's wigs are tilting now. The hall begins to shimmer in a haze of gold and rose-colored illusion. Versailles has mastered the art of drinking just enough to believe your own lies. A servant appears again, bottle poised. You wave him off politely, though he interprets this as "please fill it to the brim." The wine flows, and the truth seeps out with it. Across the table, a baron confesses that he loathes his wife but loves her dowry. A marquise reveals she's been secretly corresponding with a poet. Someone else announces they've seen the ghost of the late queen in the West Wing, though it might have been their reflection in the silverware. You take another sip. It's strange. The more you drink, the less you taste, and the more everyone else becomes fascinating. Even the Count who lectures about his vineyards now seems profound. Though he's mostly describing dirt, you nod gravely, eyes glassy with interest. In truth, you're just trying to remember which side of the glass you're supposed to toast from. When the king raises his goblet, silence falls. Every courtier lifts theirs, eyes fixed on him as though salvation lies in fermented grapes. He offers a toast, something about God, France, and good harvests, and everyone murmurs approval. The king drinks, and you follow suit. The hall erupts in polite applause. It's less about reverence, more about relief. One more toast survived without public embarrassment. But as the night drags on, the tone shifts. The laughter grows too loud, the secrets too honest. Someone starts singing. Someone else starts crying. Two dukes are whispering so intensely that you know a duel will come of it by New Year's. And through it all, the wine keeps flowing, dark, sweet, and mercilessly revealing. You swirl what's left in your glass, watching the candlelight ripple through the crimson surface. It's beautiful, almost hypnotic. The way it glows, like liquid gold with a sinister sense of humor. You realize that at Versailles, wine isn't just a drink. It's a truth serum disguised as luxury. It loosens tongues, binds alliances, and occasionally starts wars. The polite kind fought with smiles and scandal. By the time you stumble from the table, cheeks flushed, heart fluttering, you've promised to visit 3 estates, sponsor an opera, and marry off your niece to a man whose name you can't recall. You've lost track of the lies, but you've gained social favor, for now. And as you look back at the glittering banquet hall, you finally understand the secret of Versailles wine. It doesn't just get you drunk, it keeps the entire court intoxicated, on vanity, on envy, on the delicious illusion that power tastes as sweet as it smells. The table groans under towers of marzipan castles, sugared swans, and pies shaped like celestial bodies. You poke at something golden and unidentifiable, wondering if it's edible or just another metaphor for French aristocracy. By now, the air in the hall has turned into a shimmering haze of candle smoke and glucose. Every noble is sweating gently under the weight of 3 courses of luxury and 2 pounds of corsetry. And yet, here comes dessert. Not so much a course as a declaration of war between sugar and reason. Servants glide in, bearing platters that look like they were stolen from Olympus itself. The collective gasp that follows is part admiration, part resignation. You've survived swan flambe and venison that glared back at you, but now you face the true trial. French confectionery. The first wave arrives in the form of fruit, but not the kind peasants would recognize. These fruits are sculpted from sugar, painted with gold leaf, and arranged into artful still lifes that look more permanent than your reputation. You pick one up cautiously. It's solid as marble. You bite in anyway and instantly regret it. The taste is pure sweetness. No nuance, no mercy. Just an assault on your molars that could bankrupt your dentist. Next come the pastries. Delicate, towering gravity, defying works of art that defy all logic and most laws of physics. There are eclairs the length of swords, tartlets glistening with candied violets, and cream puffs stacked like fortresses. You watch as a duchess across the table attempts to slice into a caramelized masterpiece, only for her fork to ricochet off it like she's attacking a glazed shield. Nobody laughs. Laughter at Versailles is reserved for moments when the king laughs first. and he's currently deciding whether the sugared swan on his plate is an insult or a compliment. Someone whispers that the pastry chef spent 3 days constructing one of the centerpieces, a marzipan model of the solar system. Each planet is a different flavor, though no one dares to eat them because everyone wants to be seen, admiring them instead. You notice Mars slowly melting under the candlelight, a quiet reminder that even perfection has a shelf life. A servant pours you a small glass of dessert wine. Sweet and sticky enough to double as glue, you sip it politely, immediately feeling your blood sugar rise to near spiritual levels. The wine pairs perfectly with the baked confections, though pairing at Versailles simply means, can you eat this without collapsing? Then, as if things weren't ridiculous enough, the pièce de résistance appears. An enormous pastry swan covered in spun sugar feathers, wings outstretched as if preparing to ascend directly to heaven. The hall gasps again. The king smiles faintly, perhaps imagining the glory of being remembered not as the Sun King, but as the Swan King. A knife is presented to him on a silver pillow, and he slices delicately into the creature's side. It bleeds raspberry jam. Everyone applauds. You join in, pretending not to be horrified. You glance around the table, nobles daintily nibbling, servants replacing plates faster than you can blink, chandeliers shimmering overhead. You realize dessert at Versailles isn't meant to be eaten. It's meant to be witnessed. It's a performance, a finale, a demonstration of wealth so absurd it teeters on the edge of self-parody. Every bite is a declaration. We can afford to waste this much beauty. By the time the final course is cleared, your hands are sticky, your teeth ache, and your will to live is buried under a mountain of pastry cream. Servants sweep away the crumbs, like evidence of a crime. The room hums with polite groans, the universal sound of the overfed elite pretending they still enjoy being alive. As you stand, dizzy from sugar and spectacle, you catch your reflection in one of the mirrors lining the hall. You look pale, powdered, and faintly glazed, part human, part confection. For a moment, you understand the strange poetry of Versailles. Everything here, from the swans to the souls, is sugar-coated, delicate, dazzling, and doomed to melt under the weight of its own perfection. You take one last sip of dessert, wine, smile faintly and think, perhaps the true miracle of the age isn't the glory of France or the genius of its pastry chefs. It's that anyone survived dinner at all. The king insists on live music between courses. The violinist's fingers are purple, the singer's breath fogs in the air, and everyone claps politely as if hypothermia were a form of devotion. Ah yes, nothing says Christmas cheer like frostbite in D major. The Hall of Mirrors may gleam like heaven, but tonight it sounds like a refrigerator full of ambition. The musicians shuffle to their places, shivering in satin uniforms that look festive but provide roughly the insulation of a napkin. They raise their instruments with trembling hands, and the first violin gives a cautious bow stroke that squeaks like a mouse caught in a snowdrift. The king doesn't flinch. He's used to this seasonal suffering. But the courtiers around you straighten up immediately, pretending it's a new avant-garde style of composition. Music at Versailles isn't just entertainment, it's a political performance. Each note is meant to flatter the monarchy, to prove that France, even in sub-zero conditions, can produce beauty on demand. The orchestra is arranged in perfect symmetry beneath a forest of chandeliers, and the flickering candlelight makes the frost on their wigs sparkle like divine punishment. You can see their breath rising in little clouds between phrases. A flutist nearly passes out during a solo, though it's hard to tell whether from lack of air or pure existential fatigue. You try to look engaged. Everyone else is doing it, nodding along to the rhythm with the exact enthusiasm of people pretending their bones aren't freezing solid. The count beside you murmurs, "Magnifique," through clenched teeth, and his words turn instantly to vapor. Somewhere behind him, a cello string snaps with a sound like divine wrath, and the entire orchestra freezes, figuratively this time, waiting for the king's reaction. Louis XIV tilts his head slightly. A servant rushes to replace the broken string, as though repairing the world itself. The music resumes, now slightly flatter, slightly sadder. It's the sound of joy filtered through frostbite. The harpsichordist's fingers dart across the keys like desperate spiders seeking warmth. The singers, lined up near the front, perform a hymn to the Virgin Mary, their voices trembling not from emotion but from cold-induced muscle spasms. You can't help but admire their commitment. Even the soprano, who looks moments away from crystallizing, hits her final note perfectly before collapsing into a curtsy that's equal parts reverence and self-defense. A tray of mulled wine circulates among the nobles, steaming faintly in the icy air. You take a sip and feel your internal organs briefly remember what warmth is. It's spiced, rich, and faintly metallic, like survival itself. Around you, the murmurs of appreciation ripple through the crowd. "Exquisite," someone sighs. "Transcendent," another adds. But what they really mean is, if we stop clapping, our hands might freeze in place. The final movement begins, a lively dance meant to symbolize abundance and joy. The irony is almost tragic. You watch the violinist's bow shake uncontrollably as he tries to keep tempo. The brass section has gone faintly blue, but they soldier on, faces frozen in the noblest form of agony. When the last triumphant chord echoes through the marble hall, the applause is thunderous, partly for the music, mostly for the fact that everyone survived. The king smiles, a slow, satisfied curve that suggests both approval and amusement at the suffering he's just witnessed. "Encore," he says softly. The blood drains from the orchestra's collective face. You feel the temperature drop another 2 degrees as the musicians obediently prepare to repeat the entire ordeal. By the time the final note dies, the candles have burned low, the air is thick with smoke and breath, and your feet have gone completely numb. The orchestra bows, their wigs drooping with condensation. You clap, trying not to think about how many of them will be soaking their hands in scalding water until dawn. As the king rises to leave, the court erupts in another round of applause. You follow suit, smiling thinly, aware that somewhere behind the grandeur and the glory lies the simple truth of Versailles. Even music, here, must suffer to sound divine, and as you make your way toward the door, you swear you can still hear the faint, trembling echo of violins, the sound of beauty freezing solid. Despite every room boasting a grand marble fireplace, only one log burns, purely decorative. Heat is for peasants. You huddle near the flame like a moth with a title, pretending to feel toasty while slowly turning into a decorative icicle. Every palace tour promises warmth, but at Versailles, that's the greatest illusion of all. The fireplaces are enormous, each one capable of swallowing a full-grown musketeer, but they were never designed to heat rooms. No, they were built to impress visiting diplomats and to remind them that France could afford to burn wood for aesthetic purposes. The cold, meanwhile, is democratic. It seeps through silk stockings and gold-threaded curtains alike. You stand in front of one such fireplace now, its single flame struggling for relevance. It flickers against the endless marble, a tiny rebellion against architectural indifference. Behind you, courtiers chatter through chattering teeth, maintaining perfect posture even as frost forms on their eyelashes. You can practically hear the air itself shivering. A servant approaches, attempting to add a log, but the steward stops him with a look sharp enough to freeze water. "Not yet," the steward murmurs. "It must look effortless." You stare at the half-dead flame. wondering if it's possible for fire to die of embarrassment. Somewhere down the hall, someone sneezes. Loudly, expensively, a cascade of polite sniffles follows, as if cold itself were contagious through etiquette. You glance around the room, taking in the scene. Noble women wrapped in shawls so thin they're practically suggestions. Men rubbing their hands discreetly behind embroidered cuffs, and one cardinal who has simply given up and tucked his fingers inside his sleeves like a human penguin. And yet, no one complains. To shiver is human, but to acknowledge shivering is peasant behavior. Instead, people talk about the weather as if it's a rival duchess. Ah, the frost is particularly bold this season, someone murmurs, half admiringly. You smile tightly and nod. Bold, indeed. You can't feel your toes. You edge a little closer to the fire, but not too close. Too much eagerness and you risk looking needy, which is worse than frostbite. The unwritten rules of Versailles dictate that comfort must always be secondary to appearances. You'd rather perish beautifully than warm disgracefully. As the evening stretches on, the palace grows colder. The chandeliers glitter icily above, their candle flames quivering in protest. You imagine each one silently begging for retirement. The mirrors along the wall fog at the edges, turning every reflection into a ghostly portrait. Even the food on nearby trays looks exhausted, soufflés sagging, sauces congealing, all victims of Versailles' architectural cruelty. Someone suggests music to warm the mood. A harpsichord is wheeled in, its musician visibly trembling. The sound that follows is halfway between melody and teeth chattering. Still, the courtiers clap, declaring it sublime. You join in, partly out of habit, partly to restore circulation to your fingers. Eventually, a ripple passes through the crowd. The king is arriving. Everyone straightens. The musicians freeze. Figuratively this time. The doors open, and Louis XIV enters in radiant calm, his posture unbothered by the frost that plagues mortal men. His cloak trails behind him, heavy with embroidery, and the faint promise of warmth. As he passes, you swear the temperature rises, not because of the fire, but because of collective awe. The courtiers beam. The king nods. Somewhere, the single fireplace crackles louder, as if remembering its purpose. The king takes his seat by the hearth, the only seat where the heat actually reaches. You all bow in reverence, not just to his majesty, but to the invisible luxury of functioning circulation. Conversation resumes, laughter returns, and everyone pretends they're not slowly crystallizing. Hours later, when the king departs, so does the warmth. The fire dies down instantly, as if following royal protocol. You exhale a cloud of white breath and realize the truth. Versailles never needed warmth. It had spectacle. And spectacle, as everyone knows, burns much longer than wood. You glance one last time at the grand fireplace, now reduced to a wisp of smoke. It's beautiful, pointless, and entirely on brand. The perfect metaphor for the palace itself. You adjust your lace cuffs, square your frozen shoulders, and whisper to no one in particular. Ah, yes, the illusion of heat. Très Versailles. Everyone reeks of roses, musk, or despair. With no ventilation and too many powdered nobles, the air becomes a floral battlefield. You sneeze discreetly into lace and pray no one mistakes it for blasphemy. The palace is thick with scent, not just perfume, but ambition distilled into liquid form. Every noble in Versailles has doused themselves in fragrance powerful enough to stun a horse at 20 paces. It's Christmas, after all. And nothing says devotion to the divine like marinating yourself in half a liter of jasmine oil. The air is so dense with competing aromas that you can practically taste the hierarchy. The dukes smell of amber and sandalwood, the duchesses of rose and debt, and you, somewhere between lavender and mild panic. Perfume, here, isn't for beauty. It's for survival. Versailles has no proper plumbing, and the palace's odor problem is historic. Between the smoke, the candle wax, and the subtle bouquet of thousands of unwashed bodies, scent has become both weapon and armor. You don't wear perfume to attract. You wear it to defend yourself from the reality of existing indoors with 600 other people in brocade. You stand in the hall of mirrors, eyes watering, as a cloud of bergamot sweeps past. It's the Duchess of Montpensier, who believes the correct dosage of perfume is visible. She glides by, leaving behind a trail so potent that 2 servants faint and 1 candle flickers out in protest. Delicious, murmurs the count beside you, nose twitching. You can't tell if he means her scent or the chaos. The etiquette of perfume at Versailles is delicate. Too little and you're poor. Too much and you're vulgar. The trick is to smell expensive without smelling alive. Nobles are meant to float through the air like sugared spectres, an aroma that suggests purity, holiness, and a complete lack of digestive function. You're trying to strike that balance, but your personal blend of orange blossom and insecurity isn't holding up well against the olfactory assault of the season. Someone introduces a new experimental scent, eau de rye, inspired by the king himself. It's rumored to contain notes of myrrh, honey, and regal sweat. Courtiers rush to buy it, eager to smell like authority, though the end result resembles a beehive that's been on fire. Still, no one dares to criticize. If the king smells like smoke and sanctity, then so must everyone else. You drift toward the ballroom, where the perfumed fog is even thicker. The chandeliers sparkle above like icicles, and the air is syrupy with the mingled fragrances of hundreds of powdered chests. Conversations blur together. So divine, so refined. So, are you also losing consciousness? Someone opens a window briefly, and the entire crowd gasps as fresh air sweeps through. Scandalous and unperfumed, it's shut again immediately. No one wants to seem unpatriotic toward French scent-making. A noblewoman beside you discreetly dabs more perfume onto her fan, using it to waft weaponized jasmine into her rival's direction. The rival retaliates with a gust of patchouli so strong it could be used for crowd control. You find yourself caught in the crossfire, eyes streaming, nose burning, silently praying that death comes quickly and smells faintly of lilies. You can almost map the social hierarchy through scent. The Queen's perfume is custom-made, a delicate blend of vanilla and divine indifference. The King prefers something more masculine, earthy, and faintly menacing, as though the woods themselves have agreed to pay taxes. The mistresses, however, use perfumes that declare their presence long before they enter a room. You can tell who's winning favor by whose scent lingers longest after they leave. As the evening drags on, the perfumes mingle, merge, and mutate. Roses collide with musk, violets with ambergris, and somewhere underneath it all lingers the unmistakable aroma of too many humans pretending to be celestial beings. You wonder how many people in this room have forgotten what air actually smells like. Eventually, the king retires, and the crowd begins to disperse. The perfumes hang in the air like ghosts, remnants of power, beauty, and olfactory warfare. You take one last breath of the floral fog, cough discreetly, and decide that the true miracle of Christmas at Versailles isn't peace on earth. It's that no one's spontaneously combusted yet. As you stumble toward the corridor, dizzy but victorious, you think, yes, Perhaps the divine can be found here, not in prayer, not in song, but in a bottle labeled Eau de Survival. After dinner, the nobles play innocent games, charades, masked flirting, and strategic feinting. You're cornered by a marquis who thinks mistletoe is a political opportunity. Congratulations! You've entered the 17th century version of office party purgatory. The dining hall has barely cleared before the festivities begin anew. The servants whisk away the remains of roasted swans and candied fruit, replacing them with bowls of punch so potent it could dissolve emotional restraint. The candles flicker, the orchestra tunes, and somewhere in the corner, a powdered noble sighs dramatically, a signal that the night is young and reputations are about to age poorly. "Let us play something amusing," declares the Duchess of Chartres, whose idea of amusement usually ends in tears, duels, or both. Her suggestion is met with polite enthusiasm. You're already calculating how long you can feign laughter before claiming a sudden pious headache. The first game is charades, though this version involves more ego than acting. Courtiers take turns miming historical figures, mythological heroes, or scandalous inside jokes that everyone pretends not to understand. A count acts out Hercules, but mostly looks like he's losing a wrestling match with his own wig. The king chuckles indulgently. Everyone else follows suit, laughing 2 seconds later to prove they caught the joke. You laugh too, though mostly because you're terrified not to. Next comes the game of compliments, Versailles' cruelest sport. One must offer another person the most flattering, poetic remark possible, without repeating a prior sentiment. It sounds innocent, but this is social chess with perfume. You're paired with the Marquise de Clermont, whose smile could peel paint. Your beauty, you begin nervously, outshines the chandeliers themselves. She tilts her head and responds sweetly, "And yet, my dear, next to you, even the chandeliers seem dimly lit. You can't tell if it's praise or an assassination attempt." The room warms with laughter and thinly disguised loathing. A duke proposes blind man's bluff. Silk scarves are fetched. Someone's perfume nearly asphyxiates the group. You're pulled into the circle and blindfolded, spun until the room becomes a blur of laughter and dizziness. A hand brushes your shoulder, or was it a fan, followed by the unmistakable sound of suppressed giggles. When you finally stumble forward, you collide with someone's corset. The crowd erupts in applause. You remove the blindfold to find you've caught the Queen's cousin, who is now blushing in a way that guarantees this will become tomorrow's gossip headline. By now, the king has withdrawn to his private salon, leaving the lesser nobility free to behave like unsupervised children in lace. Someone starts a dance. Another decides that the mistletoe hanging above the doorway should be taken as divine permission for chaos. Couples pair off, masks appear from pockets, fans flutter like nervous birds, and the music quickens into something suspiciously suggestive. The marquis who cornered you earlier reappears, wineglass in hand, mistletoe dangling from his sleeve like a weaponized prop. "You know the custom," he purrs. You smile with all the warmth of a frozen pond. "Indeed," you reply. "But in this case, I believe the custom is survival." You step deftly aside just as he leans in, causing him to plant an enthusiastic kiss on the shoulder of a passing countess. She gasps theatrically, and within seconds, the gossip spreads like wildfire. You've avoided scandal. For now, though you suspect this victory will be short-lived. The games continue. Someone pretends to faint from laughter. Another pretends to help and pockets their jewelry. A group of ladies exchange. Knowing looks under the pretense of innocence. The musicians, exhausted but obedient, keep the rhythm alive with trembling fingers. The air smells of wine, wax, and escalating bad decisions. As midnight approaches, you realize that Versailles at play is no less dangerous than Versailles at prayer. Every jest has an agenda, every flirtation a motive. Behind each mask is someone plotting either marriage or revenge, occasionally both. You slip toward the edge of the room, watching the glittering madness unfold. Powdered faces flushed with wine, jewels catching candlelight, fans hiding smirks sharper than daggers. For a fleeting moment, you can almost appreciate the spectacle. It's absurd, yes, but also hypnotic, like watching swans fight to the death in slow motion. And as you finally escape into the quiet corridor beyond, you can still hear the laughter echoing, bright, brittle, and dangerously beautiful. At Versailles, even joy is just another performance, and the curtain never really falls. Marie-Thérèse tries to smile through yet another royal performance, while her wig tilts dangerously. You nod empathetically, knowing that even queens are one bad roast away from tears. It's the most human moment you'll see all night. By midnight, the palace has shifted from grandeur to delirium. The chandeliers still blaze, but the air has grown heavy, with perfume, exhaustion, and the faint scent of scorched sugar. The feast is long over, but the court lingers like smoke after a fire, unwilling to admit that joy, like warmth, has already left the room. And at the center of it all sits the Queen of France, Marie-Thérèse, trying valiantly to pretend that everything is fine. She's flanked by courtiers who orbit her like desperate planets, each one murmuring compliments with the precision of a surgeon and the warmth of a marble statue. "Your Majesty shines brighter than ever tonight," one says, bowing so low his wig nearly detaches. "Indeed," adds another, "the very picture of Christmas grace." The Queen's smile wobbles at the edges, her cheeks twitching beneath the powder. You suspect she'd trade all the compliments in the room for a single hour of peace or a blanket. You've heard whispers all evening that the Queen is weary, that the King has spent more time admiring his reflection than his wife, that her patience, like the wine, has run dangerously thin. And as she stares blankly into her untouched glass, you realize those whispers are not exaggerated. Marie-Thérèse looks exhausted, not from hunger or frost, but from pretending to enjoy being worshipped in a palace that treats her like another piece of furniture. Her ladies-in-waiting flutter anxiously, adjusting her gown, her fan, her crown. "Majesty, the Duke of Anjou wishes to compliment your ensemble." One chirps. "Again?" the Queen murmurs, voice brittle. "Does he ever wish to compliment anything else?" Her tone is so sharp it could slice through marble. A few nobles nearby exchange horrified glances, as if God himself just coughed in public. You watch as a servant refills her glass. She doesn't drink it. Instead, she stares at the reflection shimmering in the wine, her face, flawless yet weary, trapped in liquid gold. The orchestra begins another song, cheerful and hollow, and something inside her seems to crack. Her gloved hand trembles just slightly, but in a room this full of eyes, that's enough to start the avalanche. The murmurs begin immediately. "She's unwell," someone whispers. "Overcome with emotion," suggests another. "Or perhaps the King's new mistress has a better tailor." You glare at them, but this is Versailles. Sympathy is weakness, and gossip is blood sport. The Queen stands abruptly. Her chair scrapes the floor, the sound slicing through the music like thunder. "Enough," she says softly, too softly. But the silence that follows makes it echo like a cannon blast. All eyes turn toward her. Her fan drops from her hand, clattering onto the marble. A lady-in-waiting gasps audibly, which is practically treason. Marie-Thérèse straightens her spine, Her wig tilts perilously, as though it too has given up on royal composure. "I am retiring," she announces. It's not quite a command, not quite a surrender, just a tired declaration that the performance is over. She sweeps toward the door, her gown whispering across the floor like wind over snow. The king glances up from his chair. Surprised, but not enough to stop her, he gestures faintly, dismissing the moment like an inconvenient breeze. The courtiers bow as she passes, murmuring platitudes they'll mock later. You bow too, out of instinct. But as she passes close by, you see the shimmer of tears forming just behind her lashes. Not dramatic, not regal, just deeply, devastatingly human. When the doors close behind her, the orchestra stumbles, the room exhales, and the king signals for more music. The performance resumes, as if nothing has happened. But the queen's absence lingers like the ghost of a melody, fragile, haunting, and more honest than anything else in Versailles. You return to your seat, suddenly aware of how cold the room feels. Around you, the laughter resumes, brittle and hollow. The chandeliers burn brighter than ever, but you can't shake the feeling that somewhere in the dark, a woman crowned in gold is quietly crying into her gloves. The loneliest person in the most beautiful place on earth. The king's official mistress gifts him a painting of herself as Venus. His other mistress gifts him the same painting, but larger. You sip your wine, realizing that this palace could solve poverty, or just keep buying better art of women side-eyeing each other. It's well past midnight, and the air at Versailles has turned syrupy with perfume and tension. The feast has ended, but the real entertainment has only just begun. The annual exchange of gifts among the court's inner circle. It's less holiday spirit and more public relations stunt disguised as generosity. The king sits on a golden chair that's somehow both a throne and an act of psychological warfare. Around him, the courtiers hover like glittering moths, each bearing offerings that could either secure their future or end it. But no one draws more attention or dread than the royal mistresses. Madame de Montespan, the reigning favourite, glides forward first. Her gown sparkles like molten starlight, her confidence louder than the orchestra. A servant carries her gift, an enormous oil painting depicting her as Venus rising from the sea, surrounded by cherubs suspiciously resembling her own children. The symbolism is not subtle. She smiles, flawless and terrifying, as she curtsies before the king. "A small token, sire," she says, voice dripping honey and arsenic. The crowd murmurs admiration, though everyone's thinking the same thing. Small? That painting could cover the facade of Notre Dame. The king smiles indulgently, his eyes lingering longer than propriety allows. "Magnificent," he declares. Applause follows, too loud, too eager, like thunder rehearsed in advance. Then, like a ghost in pearls, Madame de Fontainebleau steps forward, younger, paler, and visibly determined to dethrone her rival through sheer surface area. Her gift is unveiled. Another painting of Venus, identical in subject but twice the size, featuring her own face looking smugly skyward as if she's just out. Venus herself. The room inhales sharply. You take another sip of wine, mostly to hide your grin. The king hesitates for one perfect, excruciating second, the kind of pause that can rewrite social hierarchies. Then he laughs. "Twice the size," he says, eyes glinting. "How generous." Montespan's smile freezes like ice on marble. Somewhere behind her, a duchess chokes on a candied almond and calls it divine intervention. From there, the competition escalates. A marquis presents the king with a golden snuff box encrusted with diamonds that spell out Louis. light of the world. Another noble offers a mechanical bird that flaps its jeweled wings and sings when wounded. It costs more than an army regiment. The king chuckles at each gift, amused and mildly bored, as if generosity itself has become tedious. Meanwhile, the mistresses circle each other like swans with knives. Montespan sips her wine, smiling thinly at Fontanges. "How very creative," she murmurs. "Venus must be exhausted from all this painting." Fontanges tilts her head. "Oh, but art is immortal, dear. Unlike fashions, the tension between them could melt the chandeliers. You half expect a duel to break out, fought with hairpins and passive aggression. Around the room, the courtiers whisper furiously, their fans fluttering like gossiping butterflies. Who will the king favor tonight? The established power or the rising star? Every gesture, every glance is dissected like holy scripture. The palace may glitter, but it thrives on humiliation disguised as entertainment. Eventually, the king rises. He thanks both women with the diplomacy of a man used to surviving his own household. "You have both honored me," he says, smiling the way only someone with absolute power can smile, gently, dangerously. Then he gestures to the musicians. The moment dissolves into waltz and laughter, the tension buried under violins and powdered charm. But as the mistresses glide away, one seething, one triumphant, you can't help but marvel at the absurdity of it all. These women command armies of tailors, poets, and painters, yet their battlefield is a gilded salon. Their weapons are gifts. Their victories were temporary. You swirl your glass, watching the candlelight flicker across the red wine. Versailles is many things: a palace, a theatre, a monument to ego. But tonight, it feels most like a game where everyone smiles while quietly plotting their next move. And you, lucky spectator, get to witness the oldest sport in France. Love, rivalry, and ruin dressed in diamonds and diplomacy. At midnight, the court gathers to watch the king go to bed. Because apparently, that's entertainment. You bow, murmur good night, and wonder how a man can rule Europe, yet still need 14 people to fold his blanket. The ritual is known as the coucher du roi, and it is the nightly theatre of power in its purest, strangest form. The king's bedtime isn't a private moment. It's a scheduled event, complete with a guest list, etiquette, and choreography. If Netflix had existed in 1683, this would have been its #1 show. Louis XIV. The man, the myth, the pajamas. The courtiers file into the royal bedchamber in perfect order. Each step dictated by rank, proximity to favor, and how recently they've managed to avoid scandal. You shuffle among them, holding your breath as the velvet curtains are drawn back to reveal the most famous bed in Europe. It's less of a bed and more of a national monument. A towering fortress of embroidered silk, gilded posts, and tassels so large they could double as lethal weapons. Louis XIV, the Sun King, reclines before you in his brocade dressing gown, glowing under the candlelight, like a man who personally invented gold. He greets his assembled audience with a nod that somehow conveys both divine authority and mild irritation. You bow, joining the chorus of murmured good evenings that ripple through the room like a wave of well-rehearsed submission. The king's coucher is divided into stages, each one an opportunity for flattery. First comes the removal of the royal shoes, a sacred duty reserved for a noble of impeccable lineage and unflappable patience. The man kneels, unlaces the shoes, and presents them to a servant with the reverence of a priest handling relics. Then come the stockings, the wig, and finally the robe. Each layer of clothing, a symbol of mortal weight lifted away from divine flesh. As this unfolds, the king chats casually about matters of state. A new treaty here, a bishop's scandal there, a minor war that may or may not start by spring. The courtiers nod solemnly, as though his half-asleep musings were commandments etched into stone. Someone cracks a joke about the Spanish ambassador's wig, and the room erupts in nervous laughter. You join in half a beat late, praying no one notices. Once undressed, Louis dons his nightshirt, an event requiring 3 attendants and the blessing of at least one duchess. The garment itself is immaculate, woven from linen so fine it could pass through a ring. The king adjusts it, then stands while a valet fluffs his pillows as if performing CPR on royalty. When the moment finally comes for him to lie down, it's executed with military precision. A silence falls over the court. You can hear the faint rustle of silk, the soft crackle of the fireplace, and somewhere far off, the whisper of your own sanity leaving the room. The king says his prayers in a low murmur, his words half sacred, half logistical. "May France prosper," he mutters, "and may the musicians remember to rehearse before supper tomorrow." A murmur of approval circles the room, as if this prayer personally saved Europe. Then, with a slow, regal motion, the king lowers himself into bed. Servants tuck the covers around him like they're sealing a relic in a tomb. He gives one last look at his courtiers, not to thank them, but to remind them that even unconscious, he outranks everyone in the building. "Good night, gentlemen," he says softly. "That's your cue." Everyone bows again. The nobles begin to file out in reverse order of importance. So the least relevant person leaves first, which, unfortunately, is you. You back away carefully, maintaining your bow until your spine protests. As you finally step out into the corridor, the door closes behind you with a soft click, cutting off the light and warmth of the royal chamber. The hall beyond is cold, silent, and eerily ordinary. You exhale, half in awe, half in disbelief. You've just watched an entire country put itself to bed in the form of one man, and as you make your way back through the sleeping palace, one thought keeps circling in your mind. Power, it seems, isn't just about ruling by day, it's about having an audience to applaud when you close your eyes at night. As the candles burn low, the palace exhales its true scent. Smoke, perfume, sweat, and faint despair. You breathe it in and think, eau de Bourbon power. It's intoxicating, or possibly just carbon monoxide. It's well past midnight, and Versailles has entered its most honest phase. The masquerade of glamour begins to sag like overworked frosting. The musicians are gone, the courtiers have retired or collapsed, and the grand palace, stripped of its noise, finally smells like what it truly is: centuries of human ambition baked into stone and silk. The scent is not entirely unpleasant, but it is confrontational. You wander through the dim corridors, the air heavy with the ghosts of 1,000 over-perfumed evenings. There's candle smoke curling from half-melted candelabras, blending with the lingering sweetness of rose oil and powder. Somewhere underneath, more primal aromas whisper: damp fabric, stale wine, and the faint, earthy undertone of unwashed humanity. It's the smell of a civilization desperately trying to out-fragrance its own mortality. Every room has its signature bouquet. The king's chamber carries the faint musk of beeswax polish, incense, and power, the olfactory equivalent of a raised eyebrow. The queen's apartments smell like crushed lilies, powder, and tension. The servants' quarters, somewhere below your feet, emit something far more straightforward: exhaustion. You pass by the grand staircase, and the chill air shifts. The scent here is metallic, cold marble, mingled with the ghosts of old meals, perfumes, and powdered wigs. Versailles is a living organism, and tonight it breathes through its pores. The odor of history clings to everything. The silk drapes, the paintings, even the mirrors, which seem to reflect not just light, but every scent ever committed to memory. You pause by a window cracked slightly open to the gardens. The winter air rushes in, slicing through the cloying perfume haze. For the first time in hours, you can almost smell nothing, and it's glorious. Outside, the gardens lie under a sheen of frost, carrying the faint aroma of damp soil and pine. It smells real, raw, alive. You breathe deeply, the fresh air cutting through your lungs like truth. Then someone behind you shuts the window to preserve the ambience, and the moment dies an aromatic death. Further down the corridor, you catch the unmistakable whiff of the royal menagerie. Yes, somewhere out there, the king's collection of exotic animals still lingers. Monkeys, pheasants, and deer, all adding their unique notes to the Grand Versailles perfume symphony. Somewhere in the mix, you swear you catch the faint, tangy scent of horse from the stables, carried in by a draft that refuses to respect class hierarchy. A few torches still burn, sputtering weakly, their smoke curling into the air like ink in water. The smell of tallow wax dominates, thick, oily, faintly rancid. The candles, once luxurious, now resemble dying soldiers in a losing war against darkness. And as they flicker, they release the fragrance of burnt wigs and roasted silk. You begin to wonder if history's true scent isn't roses or wine, but fatigue. From somewhere in the distance comes another smell. Food, or rather, the leftovers of it. Bread gone hard, meat congealed into silence. The kitchens never sleep. Their ghostly aroma seeps upward through the floorboards. It mixes with the powder and incense until the entire palace smells like an opulent bakery that may or may not be haunted. And yet, beneath the layers of rot and rosewater, something else lingers, something oddly human. Sweat, skin, the faint, warm scent of people who've spent the entire night pretending to be gods. It's the reminder that Versailles, for all its splendor, is still full of beating hearts and tired lungs. The perfume, the polish, the pomp, they're all armor against decay. As you make your way back toward your chamber, the mingled scents follow you like a procession. Smoke, musk, history, fear, all of it clings to your clothes, your hair, your thoughts. When you finally close your door and crawl into bed, you realize you, too, now smell faintly of Versailles. A little grandeur, a little suffering, and just enough madness to last until morning. You sigh, pulling your covers close, and the air around you shifts once more, a swirl of lavender, candle soot, and ambition. The palace settles into silence, exhaling one final time, and somewhere in the dark, it whispers its secret truth through scent alone. Beauty, when left to itself, always smells a little like ruin. While the court sleeps, the servants scurry through hidden passages carrying chamber pots and secrets. You tiptoe past, half curious, half afraid of seeing what keeps Versailles running, mostly anxiety and unpaid labor. It's well past midnight, and Versailles is finally quiet, at least on the surface. The grand halls that roared with laughter and clinking glasses only hours ago now lie in candlelit stillness. But beneath the marble floors and gilt ceilings, a different world hums to life. The palace may appear frozen in beauty, but behind its walls, it breathes, sweats, and mutters in the dark. You move through a narrow corridor hidden behind a tapestry, the air thick with the musk of wax, wood, and weary bodies. Down here, the opulence fades. The walls are bare stone, the air colder, the light dimmer. You hear footsteps ahead, soft, quick, and efficient. The servants are awake, carrying out the invisible rituals that make Versailles appear divine come morning. A boy no older than 12 passes you, balancing a silver tray piled with half-eaten pastries, his eyes bleary but alert. "Pardon, monsieur," he whispers before vanishing into another passage. Behind him, a woman hurries with a stack of linens nearly as tall as she is, her face pale beneath the flicker of her lantern. Somewhere further down the corridor, you catch the faint slosh of a chamber pot and decide it's best not to follow that particular sound. These are the veins of Versailles, narrow arteries through which the real lifeblood of the palace flows. Above, the nobles dream in their beds, wrapped in embroidered blankets. Below, hundreds of servants, cooks, valets, maids, candle trimmers, laundresses move like ghosts, unseen but essential. You realize that for every ounce of glitter upstairs, there's a gallon of sweat down here. A door creaks open to your left. You peek inside and find a cramped chamber where kitchen staff are finishing the night's cleaning. Pans clatter, knives scrape, and a young girl hums a lullaby as she scours a copper pot blackened from the king's supper. The smell of grease and smoke clings to everything. "We serve beauty," one cook grumbles, "and we live in soot." No one laughs. There's no need. They've all accepted that Versailles eats extravagance and excretes exhaustion. Further down, you find a small alcove where two maids share a crust of bread and gossip in hushed tones. They say Madame de Montespan and the new girl almost fought tonight, one whispers. "Over what?" "The other asks, biting her bread. "Over who gets to stand closer to the king's candlelight," comes the reply. They both snicker softly before resuming their work, laughter dissolving into sighs. You move on, tracing your hand along the cold stone walls. There's no gold leaf here, no mirrors, no music. Just drafts and the smell of human endurance. The soundscape of midnight Versailles is a symphony of quiet toil. The scrape of brushes cleaning floors, the rhythmic ring of wet cloths, the muffled clink of dishes stacked in endless repetition. Every task is urgent, every shadow fleeting. As you turn a corner, you nearly collide with a servant carrying a bucket of ashes from the fireplaces above. She looks startled, then quickly bows, eyes averted. "Forgive me, monsieur," she murmurs before hurrying away, leaving a faint trail of grey dust. You watch her go and wonder if anyone upstairs has ever seen her face, or if she's as invisible to them as the air they breathe. Eventually, you find a staircase leading upward. Through a hidden door, you glimpse the familiar shine of the main corridors, silent, pristine, ready for morning inspection. It's astonishing, really, how seamless the illusion appears. The nobles will wake to spotless mirrors, fresh linens, and blazing candles, never suspecting the labyrinth of hands that made it so. You linger a moment longer in the hidden passage, the faint sounds of labor fading behind you. The palace is alive, in its own strange rhythm, half dream, half machinery. Upstairs, the king sleeps like a god. Down here, the mortals keep his heaven from falling apart. As you return to your chambers, the air warms slightly, perfumed once more. You take one last glance over your shoulder to where the narrow corridor disappears into darkness. Versailles may dazzle by day, but its truest self, its weary, beautiful, unsung heart, beats quietly at midnight, in the hands of those no one will ever see. Christmas morning returns, and with it, the hangover of decadence. Everyone looks both radiant and vaguely haunted. You sip weak chocolate, wondering if you dreamed it all, or if that roast peacock really did wink at you. The palace is quieter now, not serene, just tired. The marble halls echo with the soft shuffle of slippers instead of the clatter of shoes and gossip. You make your way through corridors still perfumed from last night's chaos, where the air smells of sugar, smoke, and mild remorse. Versailles, for all its perfection, looks a little wilted. Even the chandeliers seem to be recovering from emotional exhaustion. The courtiers drift in slowly, pale as ghosts and twice as fragile. Their wigs are slightly askew, their smiles brittle. The glimmer of powdered perfection has dulled into a haze of fatigue. You pass a duke staring into a mirror as if trying to remember which version of himself he was pretending to be last night. His valet discreetly powders his face again, as though erasing evidence of human frailty. Breakfast is subdued, if one can call an event involving crystal, silver, and a table the length of a cathedral subdued. The king is absent, allegedly praying, though everyone suspects he's simply enjoying a morning without witnesses. The queen appears instead, regal and visibly done with everyone. She greets the court with the enthusiasm of a cat forced to wear a bow. Her smile is divine and deadly, a warning disguised as grace. Servants glide silently through the room, clearing plates that no one touches. A few brave souls attempt to eat, poking delicately at fruit that tastes faintly of candle wax and regret. Someone asks for chocolate, the thick, royal kind, more dessert than drink, but even that feels heavy this morning. You sip yours slowly, hoping it will soak up whatever sins you swallowed last night. Across the table, two mistresses exchange looks sharper than daggers. The rivalry that began under mistletoe has reignited over breakfast. "Did you sleep well, my dear?" one asks sweetly. "As soundly as a saint," replies the other, "though the music did go on rather late near your quarters." The silence that follows could freeze wine. Everywhere you look, last night's excess clings to the morning like smoke. The musicians, hollow-eyed, tune their instruments without enthusiasm. The servants move slower than usual, haunted by the memory of endless trays and freezing halls. The marble floors gleam, but underfoot they seem to whisper, "We saw what you did." You overhear fragments of whispered confessions disguised as conversation. "Did you see the Duke's wig catch fire?" Apparently, the peacocks were not entirely dead. Madame fainted again. On purpose, I think. The stories loop around the table, each retelling slightly more dramatic, until reality itself seems like a bored afterthought. You excuse yourself and step into the corridor, where sunlight filters weakly through frosted windows. Outside, the gardens shimmer with ice, perfect and indifferent. Inside, the palace hums with the slow grind of consequence. Servants are already scrubbing, sweeping, reassembling the illusion of divine order. The chaos of last night will be erased by noon, replaced with spotless serenity. Versailles has the unique talent of pretending that debauchery never happened, as if sin, too, were part of the decor. You glance back toward the dining room and catch your reflection in a mirror. Pale, powdered, and faintly ridiculous. You can still taste sugar on your tongue and smoke in your throat. You laugh softly, the sound small against the marble. Maybe this is what being noble feels like. Exhausted, guilty, and slightly sticky. As the bells ring for morning mass, the courtiers rise and glide toward the chapel, pretending piety as if salvation were just another performance. You follow, feeling the weight of lace and indulgence pulling at your sleeves. Versailles shines again, flawless in the light, but now you know its secret. The beauty is only skin deep, and, beneath it, everyone, even kings and queens, wakes up with the same dull ache of too much everything. The only difference is how well they hide it under rouge. While you're recovering from excess, miles away peasants pay for your powdered fun in taxes, tithes, and tears. The luxury of Versailles is a snow globe of denial, beautiful, glittering, and entirely detached from reality. Outside the golden gates of Versailles, France looks very different. The winter wind cuts sharper there, and the fields are silent under a hard crust of frost. Smoke drifts from the few chimneys that still have firewood, curling weakly into the grey sky. Peasants huddle in cottages that lean as if tired of existing, their roofs patched with straw, their bellies patched with hope. They do not wake to chandeliers or string quartets, only to the cold and the knowledge that someone, somewhere, is eating a swan stuffed with a goose, stuffed with another swan. Every coin that glitters on the king's table, every chandelier crystal that catches the light, has been scraped from their hands. Taxes, fees, dues and levies, words that mean the same thing. Give until it hurts, then give a little more. A farmer sells his last sack of grain to pay the tithe, watching his children pick at the crumbs. A widow mends another's shirt for half a loaf, and every carriage rumbling toward Versailles might as well be carrying a prayer for mercy they'll never receive. You think of them faintly, maybe guiltily, as you sip your second cup of chocolate, not because you care deeply. No one at Versailles cares deeply, but because guilt, too, is fashionable. Someone mentions the plight of the poor in passing, a conversational garnish between topics like fashion and scandal. The harvests have been poor this year, murmurs one duchess. Tragic, isn't it? Another nods, adjusting her diamond necklace. Yes, dreadfully tragic. Pass the sugar. For the peasants, Christmas isn't a feast. It's a memory of one. Bread is a luxury, meat an urban legend. The church preaches patience, the landlords collect their dues, and the king's ministers invent new taxes with the creativity of poets. There's a levy for salt, for wheat, for windows, for breathing too close to nobility, all to fund the fountains that freeze outside your bedroom window. Meanwhile, the propaganda machine hums on. Pamphlets praise the Sun King's divine generosity. Portraits show him radiant, the earthly embodiment of heaven's will. Out in the villages, that radiance looks suspiciously like frostbite. People bow to his image in church while their stomachs growl, convinced their suffering feeds something holy. Versailles shines, but the rest of France starves quietly beneath the reflection. If you were honest, you'd admit you know this. Everyone does. But acknowledging it aloud would be gauche, and worse, dangerous. So you repeat the polite fiction. The peasants are simple people. They don't need much. You tell yourself they're lucky to serve the greatest court in the world. And if they die of hunger, well, at least they die French. Occasionally, a rumor trickles in, riots over bread, a murdered tax collector, a village burned in protest. The courtiers shake their heads, murmuring how ungrateful the commoners are. How dare they not appreciate the honor of paying for chandeliers? They just don't understand magnificence, says a marquis, nibbling on sugared almonds. You nod solemnly, even as something uncomfortable twists in your stomach, because deep down you do understand. The splendor of Versailles isn't eternal. It's borrowed time. Every glittering ballroom, every painted ceiling, every decadent feast is built on the aching backs of those who'll never see it. The peasants pay today, but tomorrow's bill will come for everyone. You glance out the frost-covered window toward the distant horizon, where the land lies quiet and grey. Somewhere beyond those trees, people are waking to another day of hunger, while the palace nurses its hangover of silk and self-importance. You pull your velvet cloak tighter, comforted by warmth that isn't yours. The fire crackles softly, fed by wood taxed from someone who will freeze tonight. And in that moment, you understand the true miracle of Versailles. Not that it stands, but that it hasn't yet burned. As snow drifts past the gilded windows, You feel a strange chill that has nothing to do with the weather. You don't know it yet, but in less than a century, this same palace will echo with revolution. The feast will end, the music will stop, and the bill will finally come due. Tonight, Versailles still glows, chandeliers blazing, laughter spilling from gilded halls, powdered nobles shimmering like human ornaments. But beneath all that light is something darker, humming quietly, unseen, a restlessness, the kind that grows in the silence between violin notes. You can't quite name it, but it's there. The uneasy rhythm of history shifting in its sleep. You stroll through the Hall of Mirrors, the moonlight glinting off the endless reflections. For a moment, you catch your own eyes multiplied into infinity, powdered, perfumed, perfect. And it feels less like grandeur and more like a warning. You think of how many people it takes to keep this illusion alive. The servants scrubbing floors until their hands bleed, the peasants freezing in fields, the soldiers dying for kings they'll never meet. The mirrors don't show them, of course. They only reflect the people who believe the world revolves around their candlelight. Somewhere behind the walls, you hear the wind whistle, or maybe it's the faint murmur of the future. You imagine that same sound 100 years from now. The roar of crowds, not violins, boots, not slippers, smoke, not incense. You can almost see the tapestries torn from the walls, the portraits of smiling monarchs burning in the courtyards, the marble floors slick with rain and revolution. The idea feels impossible and yet inevitable. After all, you've seen the cracks already, not in the ceilings, but in the people. The nobles gossip about who has fallen from favor, never realizing how close they are to the edge themselves. The king sits in divine comfort, believing himself immortal, because no one dares tell him otherwise. The queen smiles through tears that no one notices. Versailles hums with confidence, the kind that always comes right before collapse. You move toward a window overlooking the gardens. The snow has thickened now, burying the fountains and the hedges under a clean, cold silence. Everything looks pure, but you know, it's just disguise, nature's powdered wig. Somewhere beyond those gates, the peasants are already stirring in their frozen beds, whispering about hunger, about taxes, about justice. Words that have been outlawed here but will soon be impossible to silence. The palace creaks in the wind, old and proud and tired. You imagine the voices of the future echoing through these halls, cries of liberté, bouncing off the same walls that once hosted endless laughter. The chandeliers will fall, the gold will melt, the silk and lace will rot away. All that will remain is stone and memory, and the faint scent of roses, long dead. For now, though, Versailles sleeps peacefully. The courtiers dream of more jewels, the king dreams of more wars, and the queen dreams of escape. None of them can see the ghosts gathering at the edges of history, invisible hands tightening around the fragile throat of an empire, too beautiful to survive its own reflection. You take one last look around the silent hall, its mirrors gleaming like frozen water. You wonder what it will look like when the laughter is gone, when the gold is dust and the songs are replaced by shouts. You can almost hear the rhythm of boots on marble, the crash of glass, the turning of time. The snow outside keeps falling, soft and relentless, like the slow applause of fate. And for the first time, the Palace of Versailles, eternal, untouchable, magnificent, feels very mortal indeed. While the nobles sip chocolate under chandeliers, the servants celebrate their own version of Christmas. Deep in the freezing stone corridors below, no feasts, no silk, just a crust of bread and a jug of leftover wine liberated from the royal table. You catch a glimpse of them laughing quietly, faces glowing by candlelight, and realize something shocking. Their version of Christmas looks far more genuine than yours. It smells of bread, sweat, and solidarity, the real holy trinity of Versailles. The palace above sleeps beneath a mountain of velvet and ego, but below, the heartbeat of Versailles continues. The servants' quarters are a world apart, narrow, cold, perpetually damp, lit by the kind of flickering light that seems allergic to hope. And yet, tonight, there's warmth here. Not from fireplaces, those are reserved for the aristocracy, of course, but from people, hundreds of them, packed into kitchens, laundry rooms, and cramped servants' halls, sharing the scraps of what's left after the king's banquet. Someone's managed to procure a loaf of stale bread, and it's being sliced as though it's sacred. A maid drizzles a few drops of wine onto it, her contribution from the jug that made its miraculous escape from the feast upstairs. "His Majesty won't miss it," she whispers, and the group laughs quietly, the kind of laughter that feels like defiance. In one corner, a kitchen boy is roasting something over a dying ember. A pigeon, maybe, or an unlucky rat, who ventured too close to the pastry table. It smells faintly edible, which is more than most things do down here. The others cheer him on like he's presenting the Christmas turkey itself. "A feast," someone jokes. "Fit for a king." The laughter that follows is softer this time, part joy, part resignation. Despite everything, there's a strange lightness in the air. The servants talk, tease, and sing. A young scullery maid hums a hymn she half remembers from childhood. And soon the room joins in, voices rising together in unpolished harmony. It's not elegant, but it's sincere. A melody that echoes through the stone halls like a prayer for better days. You notice how differently time moves here. Upstairs, every minute of court life is choreographed, gilded, and performed. Down here, time breathes. People share what they can, a story, a crumb, a song. They talk about their families in the villages they never see, about children they left behind to serve people who don't remember their names. For one night, they allow themselves the luxury of being human instead of invisible. A cook passes you a small cup of the stolen wine. It's sharp, sour, but somehow comforting. "Merry Christmas," she says with a wink. You raise your cup in return, feeling, for the first time tonight, that the words actually mean something. The room erupts in laughter as one of the footmen attempts to dance, badly, gloriously, his boots scraping the stone floor in rhythm. The others clap along, cheering him like he's performing at the opera. A girl plucks a tune on a broom handle as though it were a lute. The joy is contagious, fragile, but real. You realize this is what celebration looks like when you strip away the chandeliers and etiquette. Warmth without wealth, generosity without spectacle. Eventually, the candles burn low. The servants begin to disperse, their laughter fading into the quiet hum of duty. The same hands that toasted bread and clapped in rhythm now scrub floors, carry buckets, and prepare the palace for morning. As if joy was just another task to complete before sunrise, you stand at the edge of the corridor, watching them vanish one by one into the shadows. The air still carries the faint scent of smoke, bread, and courage. It feels sacred in its own way. Not the gilded holiness of the king's chapel, but the kind that lingers in human kindness. And as you climb back toward the glittering world above, you can't help but think, perhaps the truest Christmas miracle at Versailles isn't the feast, or the gold, or the king's divine glow. It's the quiet laughter that survives in the dark, uninvited, unrecorded, and utterly unstoppable. Christmas or not, etiquette at Versailles is a full-contact sport. You bow, you curtsy, you don't turn your back on the king, and you definitely don't sneeze in his direction. You've memorized 47 different rules for where to stand, how to sit, and when to pretend to faint. It's like living inside a game of human chess where the wrong move means social exile. Or worse, being seated near someone unfashionable at dinner. To the untrained eye, court life looks elegant, lace, grace, and effortless charm. But beneath that serene surface is pure, weaponized anxiety. Every gesture, every breath, every flick of a fan must be performed according to rules so precise. They make modern bureaucracy look relaxed. You're not living in Versailles. You're performing Versailles. And the script changes daily. Your morning begins with the first of many decisions that could make or break your reputation. How deep to bow? Too shallow, and you're disrespectful. Too low, and you look desperate. You've spent months perfecting the ideal angle, a precise 35-degree bend that says, "I'm loyal, but not pathetic." The Queen's courtiers favor deeper curtsies, all trembling knees and martyrdom. The King's favorites, on the other hand, bow just enough to be insolent. It's politics, by spinal flexibility. Then there's the matter of speaking, or, more accurately, not speaking. Versailles is an opera where everyone's lines are whispers. You must flatter with conviction while pretending you're merely making an observation about the weather. The King's complexion glows this morning, someone says, which roughly translates to, "I'd like to keep my income this year." You nod wisely and add, "Indeed." Your Majesty radiates divine warmth, while trying not to inhale too much wig powder. Every interaction is a trap. You compliment the wrong duchess's gown. Scandal. You fail to laugh at a nobleman's joke about the Spanish ambassador's hat. Suspicion. You stand in the wrong spot during the king's procession. You've just committed a form of social treason. The invisible hierarchy stretches across the palace like spider silk. One wrong move, and you're tangled. The rules even dictate movement. You can't simply walk. You must glide. Your steps must whisper against the marble, your arms drifting gracefully like you've spent your entire life underwater. Turning your back on the king is forbidden, which means exiting any room feels like a slow-motion moonwalk of terror. You smile, bow, retreat 3 steps, bow again, then shuffle backward through the door, praying you don't trip over your own dignity. Meal etiquette is equally treacherous. You can't eat before the king, you can't stop before the king, and you definitely can't chew audibly. Forks are an art form. Spoons, a gamble. You once saw a nobleman dismissed from court for licking his fingers after dessert. He vanished from Versailles the next day, and everyone pretended they'd never known him, as though he'd been erased by bad manners. Even your wardrobe is a battlefield. The lace, the jewels, the towering wigs, none of it is for beauty. It's armor. Each outfit says, "I belong here. I know the rules. Please don't destroy me." The king's mistresses wear gowns so wide they could block traffic, but you play it safe, aiming for elegance without arrogance. The line between grace and execution is razor thin and constantly moving. By afternoon, you're exhausted, your neck stiff from bowing, and your smile frozen in place. You overhear 2 courtiers whispering about a lady who accidentally addressed the Duke of Burgundy as Your Grace instead of Your Highness. She's now eating breakfast alone, which, in Versailles terms, is equivalent to exile. You retreat to your quarters, peel off your embroidered armor, and sigh. Outside, the snow falls softly over the gardens, pure, silent, mercifully rule-free. You watch it, wondering what it's like to live without hierarchy, to breathe without rehearsing. But the thought passes quickly. Tomorrow, you'll wake up, lace yourself back into your role, and bow again. Because at Versailles, Survival isn't about bloodlines or beauty, it's about precision, and if you can curtsy, flatter, and glide through the chaos without tripping, congratulations. You've mastered the most dangerous art of all, existing elegantly in a world that punishes authenticity. So tonight, as you lie in your clean, quiet bed, one that doesn't require 4 servants and a wig adjustment to climb into, take a slow breath and think about the glittering ghosts of Versailles. Imagine the echo of laughter in the Hall of Mirrors, the clatter of porcelain plates, and the rustle of silk moving through candlelight like a soft storm. Because for all the beauty, the jewels, and the gold, life at Versailles wasn't really comfort, it was choreography. Every smile was rehearsed, every glance strategic, and every celebration just another performance in a theatre of fragile power. Behind the powdered faces were aching backs, frostbitten toes, and the quiet exhaustion of people pretending to be perfect. Yet somehow, through all the spectacle and absurdity, they managed to find joy in gossip, in candlelight, in music echoing through frozen halls. The same human spark that made peasants huddle for warmth also made nobles dance under chandeliers, a shared, stubborn desire to feel alive. So as you drift off tonight, maybe whisper a little thank you for your radiator, your slippers, and your freedom to sneeze without scandal. Because you, my friend, have already lived a better day than anyone who ever wore a 3-foot wig and called it fashion. History may shimmer with gold, but it's the warmth of ordinary life, the quiet, unglamorous humankind that truly keeps us alive. Sleep well, and dream of a world where no one has to curtsy to survive the holidays.